All right, welcome back to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your host, Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo. We're live. We're here. What's going on?
Same stuff, different day, man. Just chilling, enjoying the Southern Oregon weather, which is mainly liquid. It will freeze and become solids on occasion, but those occasions are rare. Just enjoying the lack of sunlight.
We live in a
Man,
crazy world, I tell you what.
it is. It's. I don't know. We're under a winter storm warning right now. And we live down in this valley surrounded by mountains a virtual ring around us. We have to go up through mountain passes to get out of this valley. And um, so they have to give the weather for higher elevations, because there's people all over the place around here. They're under a winter storm warning, and down here, all we're getting is rain. So if it becomes slush, I'll consider it dangerous.
Well, we have
So,
that front that you were warning me about, but
yeah.
we're so far down south. We're going to get a band later on this evening, but you were
Mhm.
concerned that for everybody else in the United States, if they see that huge system, they're like, wow, that's blanketing
Mhm.
from the north to the south across the eastern seaboard, or it's heading in that direction. And but down here, we're in this scenario, we're catching that little tail end of that system.
Mhm.
There is going to be a band that's going to run through. Apparently,
Mhm.
we had winds, savage winds all day, but these are not. But like I tried, there's no way I could convey to you by typing.
Yeah.
Although I think you got the point of where
Yeah.
my thought on the matter was by what
Yeah.
I wrote, but it's such a given. Like when we see the, just like you over there, you
Mhm.
could step outside and know, you can predict with room with error, and you guys out there as well in your local, I would assume in your local areas, what the lowdown is, barring some weird immediate shift in climactic activity within your
Yeah.
township. You know the story more or less of what's going down, whether it's
Yeah.
going to rain in 5 or 10 or half an hour and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything's relative as well because I forget how far south you really are. So, there were tornado warnings all over Central Florida, but
Yeah,
they got as far south as Broward County, or maybe it's Brevard County. I don't remember the one right on the by Daytona Beach.
yeah.
They got that far south, and I forget how far south you are. But then again, like I said over text, I don't know how reliable your internet service and your electricity is in high winds like that. Mine's pretty sketchy. It depends. We will sometimes lose power, sometimes lose internet. But if we get into the 30-mile-an-hour range and up, because we just don't get that around here. Now, I would imagine your infrastructure is built for better, but that doesn't, account for everything.
Well, no, anything can always happen,
Sure.
but remember, Miami. I've been looking. I've been looking a lot.
Hmm.
Well, not a lot, but I've been coming across
Hmm.
stuff about Miami, and we've entered a new, or what I'd like to call, for my purposes in this thing that I'm saying, a new era. It feels like, um, where we have new people that have come in to
Hmm.
the county, and it's multiplied the amount of people here. But these people are not, they're new Miamians, let's say, like
Hmm.
fresh out the gate Miamians. Um, and they bring their own unique
Yeah.
in the way they carry themselves, in the point of references that they have, in contrast to a typical Miamian.
Mhm.
Um, and at this stage, a typical Miamian would be, anybody that's been here for X amount of decades or whatnot, and this
Yeah.
and that. Um, but I have seen a lot of, so I've seen a lot of posts about explaining Miami and Dade County, and I
Mhm.
love how they explain many things, but like in particular the Cubans and the Cuban culture and stuff. And when I listen, I pay attention and stuff, and the way they unpack it, um, it's like a novelty thing from their perspective, because
Mhm.
it's everything's new to them, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I find it curious from a new point of view. It is novelty to them, but you're talking about a community of people, um, that have been here as good as a lifetime,
Yeah.
or
50,
two,
60 years. Yeah.
right? And so, to anybody observing it, it's you would catch
Mhm.
the novelty aspect of the way they're explaining it. Um, it's cool because it's cool, but it's funny,
Yeah.
and those two, because from my vantage point, I could see the variations, like, oh, these are new people that are doing this video or this or that. But what they are doing in addition to that is that since it's fresh, one sees it from a fresh set of eyes, as opposed to, yeah, this is the same place, the same this. You're
Mhm.
saying it, oh wow, yeah, because they'll say, oh, it's got the Bayside area, it's got the this, it's got the. You're like, wow, yeah, that's pretty freaking cool. And
Yeah.
I'm like, damn, I'd like to be there. Oh, wait a second, I am here. So it is a strange thing,
Now,
you
let
know.
me ask you a stupid question. I got to ask you this: has watching any of that made you go, "Whoa, I need to go check that out"?
Some things, yeah.
Yeah. Have you gone
What, are you kidding?
to go see what they were talking about?
No, some things, yeah, but not to the level of getting my ass up out the door and doing.
So you look it up online.
I've been everywhere. I've been here for the past 40 some odd years,
Well, I
all my life.
understand that. I understand that, but I'm 90 miles away from Crater Lake, one of the natural wonders of the world, and I've explored it thoroughly online. But the last time I was there, I was 10, I think, something like that. So it's been a while.
There's a one video. There was an incident on New Year's, and so, unbeknownst to me,
Hmm.
I mean, I know this exists, but it's not my vantage point.
Yeah,
There's people in Miami that have totally different experiences than myself.
I'm sure.
Um, I'm 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 looking at things from a very specific vantage point,
Hmm.
and if I and it's not readily available to me to see out of different people's eyes, because I'm using my eyes,
Sure.
but the ability to, and that's sort of a thing that happens too when one sees things like what I'm saying,
Hmm.
where you're like, oh, that's how they see it. But it's not easily available. But when you come across something like, on New Year's, people from their apartment buildings,
Hmm.
high rises in Miami, something that I'm not, like, I don't connect high rise apartment buildings and Miami in the same
Hmm.
sentence. To me, I'm a first floor level
Yeah,
on
you
the
and me
ground.
both. Yeah.
So I'm not thinking of people in that sort of like gigantor
Hmm.
metropolis, but there's people that have their whole lives
Hmm.
in Miami with the connotation of a high rise building living.
Hmm.
And so these people were filming from their high rises, looking down. And by the way, this is exclusive real estate. Looking down at Bayside Marketplace, which is, our Central Park, let's
Hmm.
say, on the bay.
Okay.
And police were coming, and it filled from end street to end street, all of Bayside, police cars, lights, and it was nighttime, and it was just, and people were running, and there was a commotion. And so, what one of the things, But some of these people in these high towers,
Hmm.
some of them are new arrivals,
Hmm.
be it for the rap music industry or fashion industry or whatever, from all parts of the world, but also in the
Yeah.
United States. They've been coming here, so they have different well, anyways, they're injecting their unique thing. So a conspiracy started flowing. Why
Uh-oh.
was so much police presence
Hmm.
there? And some people started to create a conspiracy where there was like a 10-foot giant aliens walking Bayside, and that's why people were running. And
Uh-huh.
because you see in the video people running, and there's a video of this shadowy ten
Hmm.
foot thing looking from the top down from that camera view of this shadowy thing moving through Bayside on the edge of the road there
Hmm.
before you get in,
Yeah.
and people hauling ass, and it spread like wildfire.
Hmm.
So, anyways, what I'm getting at, I don't know that it's bullcrap, but if I had to pick, I would lean towards bullcrap. But
Hmm.
why am I leaving an open space for the heck of it? Um, but not that of course, not that I believe it, but some people will. Um,
Sure.
and the point that I'm getting at is that these people with their imagination and this bullcrap story have created a little mini legend
Hmm.
that may have years of propagation,
Hmm.
and so those are the things that are added when people come into an area.
Well, you'll know how there's a way you'll know if that has affected anything in Miami. You were saying that's pretty exclusive real estate, those high rise apartments. If
Yeah.
the price of those start to drop, you'll know that's had an effect. As strange as it may sound, there's a thing in real estate that's known as a stigmatized dwelling. And what they mean is something happened here and it can reduce the value of a property. Now, it varies from state to state. Here in Oregon, they they don't see a stigma attached to property. Like if somebody died
50
in this
people
room, you
50
know,
people executed by firing squad inside the living room of an Oregon
yeah,
house.
their attitude is it's not the house's fault. That doesn't make it worth any more or less. Okay. And so, but there are other places where there is no law about that. So it can affect the property. There are some states where, and some places within these states, where all you have to do is start the rumor that a house is haunted, and suddenly the value can drop by up to a third. And you and I would think, well, that's craziness. But there are enough people that would take that into account that it actually does happen.
I don't think that's crazy. If
You
I
know,
know a place had some sort of weird happening for my taste, I just as well avoid that. And
well,
even though there's nothing,
and that's what I mean. If enough people think that there are 10-foot aliens strolling around, I don't know, Bayside Marketplace, that's what it's called,
yeah,
checking out the stores and hoping to find t shirts in triple extra large
yeah,
that's long enough to fit them, they're going to get the heck out of there. And pretty soon the value of that real estate is going to go down. So if you see that real estate start dropping, you know it had an effect.
yeah, that's not likely, but I get what you're saying. I mean, my main point really was the how people bring
Yeah,
some,
preconceived notions. Yeah.
yeah, they bring or they add to the culture is what I'm saying,
Hmm.
where you're not going to get, so like back in the 50s and 60s with all the alien abduction stuff that was going on,
Hmm.
um from a Cuban perspective, It's no more than a curiosity, and I guess maybe that's why it attaches to me the same attitude. Like, I don't
Mhm.
see aliens as a viable within the probability spectrum. I really think it's a bunch of hogwash, but I could be wrong because, you know, I
Yeah.
could be wrong. But I wouldn't have pictured the Cuban community, the Cuban exile community in Miami, to have come up with an alien story like these newcomers have come
You
up with.
never know, man. You never know. There's different kinds of hooch out there that you and I have never experimented with. You never know.
Well, no, I'm telling you, but I guess you get my main point.
I
Um,
do. I do get it. And sometimes I'll agree. Sometimes it is kind of fun to look at something that you know very well, or an area that you know very well, through different eyes to see what they notice, excuse me, what they think. And I'll admit sometimes to see what they get wrong. You know, whether
yeah,
it be something like pronouncing somebody's name wrong or completely butchering the name of a town, to, well, legend says that 4 coal miners died here. Well, stop, back the truck up. There's never been a coal mine here. We don't mine coal here. We do mine gold out here, but we don't mine coal out here. So, that's kind of those kind of little details.
well, we have a few different legends, more of them that I don't know. But one of them is we have our equivalent to the Bigfoot,
Hmm.
which is called the skunk ape. Well,
Skunk ape.
actually,
Yes, I've heard of it.
we have two. We have the skunk ape and we have the chupacabra.
Yes, I've heard of both of them.
Now, the chupacabra was pulled from somewhere in either the Caribbean or Latin America and brought over here, where we had some incidences
Hmm.
supposedly, if I remember well, but I'm not too clear. But the point is that these are pulled from mainstream culture and injected into our local
Yeah.
area. So now there's a welcome center for the skunk ape and all that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we get a lot of Sasquatch up here. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it.
yeah, it's just like legends and whatnot.
Hmm.
It doesn't it doesn't exclude the fact that that may exist,
Hmm.
because you can't prove something that that you haven't. Like, if somebody says, "Oh, aliens landed over there," but there's no evidence of it, you can't prove it negative or positive either way. So
Yeah.
it's possible, but since there's no proof
Hmm.
other than people claiming it, it's not at the strictest level. You can only say, I believe it because I believe it, or I don't because I don't, and whatever.
Hmm.
But there's a welcome center for
Okay.
chupacabra, for skunk.
Skunk ape. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Dan Haryu says I heard about that alien and all that footage had disappeared.
You see it, see how it spreads even up
Hmm.
into the northern areas.
Hmm.
But now
Well,
there's a legend.
dude, there's a Brit who is he's a reactor. He doesn't do he does a little bit of music, but mainly he reacts to other YouTube videos. And he's in England and he reacted to that 10-foot aliens in Miami.
Oh, you saw the same thing I'm talking about?
Well, I saw that he had reacted to it. I haven't watched it, but it comes up in my suggestions because I have watched other videos on his channel, but I'm not subscribed to him.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but yeah, it already made it over to the UK. So it's spreading up to where Dan is in Massachusetts. That's not a surprise at all.
yeah. For
Um,
us here, and I guess you'll tell me. So, well, you tell me. Obviously, over here we have, it's a metropolis like area.
mhm,
Maybe an equivalent would be Portland.
probably, yeah, would be the closest equivalent.
So we have a lot of different um, people from all parts of the country and the world and such.
Mhm.
Um, in your town, it's a little bit more laid back, I would say,
Yeah,
according to what you've said.
yeah, much better,
Um,
much more laid back.
but So there is a difference there, but
Uh-oh, your mic just died. Uh-oh. Nope, still can't hear you. All right, no worries. Dan says, okay, you heard it today. I saw that video suggested to me, I want to say yesterday. So maybe it was today. I don't know. But yeah, I'd not watched the video, and I I don't really follow the news much anymore. It just gets to be the same thing over and over again, and I'm not interested. I do listen to the news in on the radio, but mainly because they have to keep it short and sweet. The top of the hour news here on KMED. Let's see here. Jim says, when we were looking for a new house, we wanted to check out one where 3 people died. Lots of drywall was missing from the cleanup. Yeah. Um, Son lived there taking care of his parents. He went outside, had a heart attack, and the parents basically starved in. Oh man, that's sad. Um, yeah. Uh-oh. My dog tangled the cable. Give me a moment. That's Eloy. Okay, no worries. We're no worries. Now, when it comes to material facts about a home here in Oregon, what they consider a stigmatized property. For instance, if there was a meth lab there, that is a material fact
can you hear me?
because I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, he earlier we had this problem,
Hmm.
but it was due to the my browser,
Hmm.
and now my dog got up, walked around, tangled the cables, and shifted it enough so that everything went haywire. So twice.
Well, let's put you back where you belong, and then we can continue from there. Yeah, was in regards to a uh, comment that Jim had made about somebody dying in a home. Um, uh, if the state of Oregon, when it comes to stigmatized properties, it has to be a material fact that genuinely affects the property. Like if there was a meth lab there, there's going to be some cleanup because there's residual chemical residue and stuff like that. That's a material fact that does affect the property. So that type of a stigma on a property is valid. But somebody saying, well, this house is haunted, that's considered an immaterial fact because it can't be proven. It doesn't affect the structure. If there was a fire there 10 years ago and it's been rebuilt, that is a material fact that affects the actual structure. That has to be disclosed, and that can bring down the value. But just saying, well, this used to be a graveyard and the souls of the dead, do the hokey pokey out the front yard every full moon, that's that's an immaterial fact. So
Yeah.
so
So what are your area legends?
oh, there's all kinds of them, mainly to do with things like Sasquatch. But this area for decades was um, basically with the forestry industry, the timber industry, lumber, what have you. And there have been people tramping around up in the woods, both cutting lump timber and hauling it out. And I mean, since the 1850s, and there's been gold mining, uh, there's been all kinds of stuff and legends about wild animals or Bigfoot or you name it. There are just too many to count and none that spring to mind. There are that many. It's just like, where do you start? Crazy people that did this and that, and just all kinds of weird stuff. But I think you have that just about anywhere. When we lived down in Nevada, we were just, I mean, let's see, six, probably about 10 miles from Virginia City, which was the biggest silver strike in world history. And, excuse me, that boom, that mining boom, produced a whole ton of characters, as you can imagine. And the legends about what they found down in mines, or what happened to this guy who stumbled into a cave and never came out, or, I mean, lots of legends
Yeah.
all over the place. So it's not really anything that you can, it's not really anything that you can prove yes or no. So that's why they continue, those stories continue to be told.
Yeah.
It's just, a lot of it is sitting around the campfire telling scary stories type of stuff, you know.
Yeah. That's part of the, I guess, fun or curiosity of these
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
We have a guy from somewhere in Eastern Europe, I believe it was, that came here in the early 1900s,
Hmm.
and he fell in love, bought property, and began a building project using the local coral rock.
Yeah.
And legends sprung out because how could he have moved such things? Did he use clever pulley systems, or did he use magnetism? And a lot of people, and this went on for a century of questioning, um, because at the time where it was located, out in an undeveloped part of Miami, which today is smack dab in the middle of the of city,
Hmm.
um, they would have needed some sort of machinery. They would have needed, but he built the place as a love letter to his love,
Hmm.
and it's called Coral Castle. You can find it.
Okay.
Well, what ends up happening is that questions over it, have always continued.
Hmm.
But there are some people that have explained it away with even photographs of actual freaking machines, hauling stuff at that
Yeah.
time in that place. So a deeper investigation will show the, I guess, more standard answer to that. That things that, but what he built was doors made out of pure, huge monolithic rock that you could
Mhm.
touch with a finger and it would rotate.
Yeah.
So he was clever, putting aside levitation and such.
Hmm.
But the legend persists.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are places like that. There is a house. Well, it's maybe 15 miles away from us here in a little town called Gold Hill. They call it the House of Mystery, that sits upon the Oregon vortex. And that's one of those places you walk into the house and they have set up little things like they've got a couple of pipes bolted up against the wall, and there's a bowling ball, and you try to roll the bowling ball what looks like downhill, but it gets a little ways away and then comes right back. It looks like it's rolling uphill. And basically, all it is a massive amount of optical illusions, because
Yeah.
you get in the house and you are so disoriented because it was built on a hill. Nothing is level in this place, but you expect certain things to be level.
Yeah. You need a point of reference.
Exactly. And you have none. So, like that rail with the bowling ball on it, you're actually trying to roll it uphill. And of course, it's not going to do it because, gravity works. But it looks like it should be trying to roll downhill when it's rolling uphill. It's an illusion, but it is kind of neat. You go in and you go, whoa, that's cool. That's this, that, and the other. But if you were to go in there with a laser, you would see, yeah, no, it's actually facing downhill and you're trying to roll it uphill. that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And that's just one example. They say trees grow crooked and everything else. Well, trees grow up towards the sun. So if you're standing on unlevel soil, they're going to be kind of bent because they're growing straight up and you have no frame of reference. So it looks weird. But that's all it is. It looks weird. But
Yeah. I mean, um, there's a lot of weird little. So I'll tell you what I was thinking when you were saying gravity, but I don't want to take us away from the thing. Do you believe in gravity?
well, I'm kind of forced to because I've been a victim of a localized gravity storm a time or two. And they don't give, like Jimmy Buffett said, they don't give no warning signs. When you get caught in a gravity storm, your butt's going down. So,
Well, no, I mentioned. I'm just saying what the quick little thing, but it is a side road, so I'll keep it tug. I haven't looked completely into it, but um, the field of I don't know what to general relativity
mhm,
with Einstein and whatnot created, and again, I don't know all the details, but um, created a some sort of problem or other with the notion of gravity as we understand it. Um, so Newtonian versus whatnot, because in this relativity thing,
mhm.
what's this guy
Einstein.
Einstein. If you think of space,
Mhm,
you've seen probably the videos where there's like this big stretched out fabric, and they
mhm.
put a bowling ball in the center,
Yeah,
and when the bowling ball sits in the center, it collapses the fabric, and they're saying space is that fabric, and objects in space create a bending of space, and there you have what we consider our gravity. It's a bending of space and whatnot, and so there's some sort of battle within that world where the
mhm.
two things have competing interests and whatnot, this and that.
Right.
But whatever.
Yeah. When even they can't figure it out, I'll stick with what I was taught until something new that they can prove comes along. you know,
Well, no,
because
but
when the experts can't agree, how can I form an opinion on that?
no, but that's well, shy. Apart from not knowing all the details, so I can't
Hmm.
per- perfectly say one thing or the other. The fact that the experts have a contradiction amongst the two things
Yeah.
means that whatever we learned,
Sorry.
like whatever we learned,
Hmm.
I guess they're arguing, well, yeah, you see the effect of gravity, but
Hmm.
the explanation is not this, it's something else. Like, again, I would need to sit. That's why I said it was a side road, but it's
Yeah,
something that.
exactly my point. So if they can't even agree on what it is, how can I form an opinion? Because they're the experts. They study this stuff for a living. If they aren't 100% certain, how can I say it's 100% certain? I don't know, you know.
Yeah,
So,
because they do say, we've talked about it before,
mhm.
um, that if you measure time, because it has to do with space time and this and that,
Yeah.
but if you were to take and we've talked about it, a balloon up into the sky,
Hmm.
the further out you go, if you use two clocks set at the same time, the further out you go, there's going to be a different. Even though they were set at the same time, one will eventually lag the other, depending on your position, distance
Yeah.
from this source of gravity, or this bending of space time that we're in. So, are we in a pocket that has created a timeline, and outside of that pocket, the further you get away, time becomes something else, or maybe non-existent, or something else. So there's
Well,
all those
that
questions.
that's why Einstein called it the theory of relativity because time is relative to where you are, you know. Time
Yeah.
is relative to on a number of things.
Yeah.
And believe it or not,
Well, that's what he
when,
says.
yeah, well, and nobody's come up with anything really to
No,
contradict.
the, well, I can't speak to it because that's where the contra. So one of the, again, it was a side road, but one of the contra, peripherally not paying 100% attention to the whole thing, but there's a contradiction
Mhm.
where they need both things, but both things can't work together in effect, and there's all whatever.
Right.
Anyway,
Well, I'll put it to you this way: for satellite communication, and they almost didn't do it, but when they were programming these satellites to communicate with one another, as in the satellite in its in the infancy of satellite communication, for those of you who can speak, um, they had to factor in Einstein's special theory of relativity in order to get satellites to synchronize time with each other, because that's how satellite works. Like your GPS, for example, you need two, a minimum of two, three is preferable. And the way it works is the signal from whatever device you're using for GPS, it's based on how long it takes for that signal to get from the satellite to you and back. And then using a minimum of two, three is better. They can triangulate position down to where that GPS unit is in relation to the Earth. So if the satellites are not synchronized, an error in how long it takes the signal to get from the satellite to the device back up to the satellite, an error in timing could put you way off on Earth. So they had to take Einstein's theory of special relativity as a part of the computation that they do, because they take the results from the three different satellites, and that all gets, you know, collated and added together and figured out through this formula and what have you, and they extrapolate back, and that's your location.
do you know who the first country was to have a satellite?
Russia.
Cuba.
Sputnik 1.
Cuba.
Well, then they need to rewrite history, because the history books say Sputnik 1 in 1957.
And they'd be wrong.
Okay. What was
Is
that
there any?
satellite then?
Is there any?
What was that satellite?
Okay, so early on in one of the early World Series in the United States,
Mhm.
Cubans were big fans of baseball,
Mhm.
and but they wanted to hear it on the radio, but they couldn't get it. The closest tower was in Key West, but it didn't reach the whole island. So they took a plane, fitted it with um, proper receiving and such devices. They took off from the airport, and so that Cubans could hear the World Series, they would fly the plane from the Keys and back on a
Okay.
back and forth mission, effectively creating that
That's a repeater, but that's not a satellite. A
that
satellite is
satellite.
outside the atmosphere.
Dude,
Yeah, a
you
satellite is outside of the atmosphere. That's a repeater,
put
but yes.
put
Okay.
put everything in the context of which it's being given.
Yeah.
It just, I mean, for a second here.
Yeah.
So they would fly back and forth, and they would transmit the signal, and then the
Mhm.
following year, so that everybody could see it, then they upgraded to something or other, or this or that, and then
Mhm.
everybody was able to see it. But the
Yeah.
point is that man will find a way with the
Yeah.
available technology to do what they
Yeah.
need to get their baseball or whatever else information. But yeah, I'm
And that
obviously obviously I was stretching the thing. Come on.
and that right there is, I'm not going to get into that. Never mind. It has to do with electronic line of sight and what have you. But yeah.
You
So
can only go as far as the curvature of the. Yes, I know, dude.
no, no,
You
no,
know,
no, 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 no. That's not what I was getting at. Never mind. Go ahead.
yeah, a radio signal
Hmm.
can only go as far as the line of sight
Mhm.
as it repeats, and it needs another repeater. I get it. So look, obviously, and I can see Greg over there. So when you take the claim, take it in the spirit, not you, but
Yeah.
everybody in whole. Take it in the spirit of which it was given.
Mhm.
This is not you know, it's the spirit of which it was given, for goodness sakes. The point is that in order to get what they, and nobody else had done that.
Mm-mm.
Okay, that had been the first. Now, is that, am I being serious? Yeah, it happened, but am I being serious? Like, we have the first satellite in Cuba over there, and no,
I'll
you
tell
get.
you. I'll tell you where I thought you were going when you were talking about baseball. I thought he's going to tell me somebody hit a ball so hard it left the atmosphere. I thought that's where you were going as a joke.
The problem too is that there's no opportunity. It's unfortunate, but it's part of human beings, and we all do it.
Mm,
I was watching. So there's a group of kids that have a show, and there's various, but they're a political group,
mhm.
but not focusing on the political necessarily, but just the concept of what I'm about to say. Um, Many of the things that they talk about, I agree with
Mhm.
on principle
Mhm.
as a starting point, but and it's unavoidable to everybody because we're human beings, and just like learning about Sasquatch or any other mystery, it tags along in our heads as part of something that comes up in conversation, and we'll fill it when we have the context to do so, even though it's not a truism, but we use it as an example within something else.
Sure.
But so these people use things in popular culture within the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years as given within their conversations. And what ends up happening is that they don't question the given.
Yeah.
So by not questioning the given, they accept it as fact
Mhm.
because at some point it just
It's
let's not even,
easier.
well, let's not call it a lie. If somebody at one point says this is how this works,
Mhm.
and in its initial phase, it's sort of like a maybe it works
Mhm.
this way, whatever
Yeah.
it might be. But then 2 years down the line, that maybe it just gets late, not lazy on purpose, but it's simply omitted from the conversation. All of a sudden, that maybe it works this way becomes no, it works this way.
Mhm.
And whole civilizations are built around it works that way, and people's worship at the altar of it works that way. And all of a sudden, so, anyways, these people throw in things that I cannot help but see flat out is a bunch of hogwash in the context of things that I, as a base, believe ethically, let's say,
Mhm.
but dirty it with a bunch of hogwash, and I can't help but to cringe with it. And so, anyways, the point is that it's part of the human thing. If we're not willing to open the mind, and again, that's part of the human thing too, then we repeat the same. No, it's only until we question what we don't feel that needs questioning that we may get the same answer and we're on our way, or we may get alternate routes, whatever it might be, over a topic. Um, and then we learn a variation. And once we learn something, there's no going back unless you
Eh,
lie to yourself.
yeah, I was going to say if you're willing to accept it, because I mean, look at antiseptic surgery or look at antiseptic treatment of the wounded in any hospital. The guy who he was a Hungarian who came up with the theory. He couldn't prove it because the microscope hadn't been invented yet. But he was of the theory that a good percentage of these people dying in hospitals of otherwise minor injuries were dying because of their blood was being tainted by the fact that doctors just weren't washing their hands. I mean, they would go in and, remove something from somebody, and then with the same pair of gloves, go start digging in and working on somebody else, and infections were rife. And he developed this theory to say, no, I mean, you've got cleanliness is what we need here. You're tainting their blood. He didn't know anything about bacteria. He didn't know anything about microbes because, as I said, the microscope hadn't been invented. But they all thought he was crazy because they didn't want to admit that maybe doctors were killing their patients unknowingly. And he died a pauper in an insane asylum, pretty much. They just put him away. You're crazy.
I'll give
Then
you
a few years later, the microscope is invented, and pretty soon people see, oh, yeah, there are little critters running around in all this stuff.
I'll give you a one slightly in the area of washing and cleaning,
Mm-hmm.
especially in that scenario. It became a reality. It is a reality for us now. It's almost instinctual now. Um, I I don't want to get into that, but as 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 a matter of course, today we all know that. But back then, it may have been quite the questionable situation. Well, there's a video and I run into a lot of these, and imagine all the things we run into that we don't can't tell the difference of what's bull crap and what's not. Um, because there's more of it than not.
Mm-hmm.
If you calculate out that if you discover one bull crap and you're made aware of it from your own
Mm-hmm.
understanding because you have
Yeah.
a backlog that gives you the question, there may be others that you're unaware of. Anyways, the thing I ran into a video where a guy said people back then were always drunk, like talking about the Middle Ages, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, they were walking around inebriated because they would prefer not to drink the water because the water would get them sick, but not the beer and the ale and such. And he was saying, and so people, kids, everybody was drinking the liquor and the wine and the this and that. And he was like hammering it. Now, anybody that sees that video, and he gave the answer because the water was tainted,
Yeah.
bacteria and such.
Yeah.
Yes, anybody that watches that video may say, well, okay, past the point of such and such back in time, everybody was half-ass drunk and drinking
Mm-hmm.
beer. I disagree easily. It's a bullcrap way to say it. It's untrue in part. It depends on what area you're talking about because there were
Mm-hmm.
many places, more than not, where the streams and the waters coming from mountains, coming from springs, and over and over where people did not have that variation going on
Mm-hmm.
at all. That was localized to big cities. In some cases, yes, some cases, no. It depended here and it depended there. If it was in Roman era, that was not the case. If it was in the medieval era, then that would have been the case in some cases in some towns and cities, depending. There's,
There's
but
a lot of variables involved there. Yeah.
right. So, but the fact that he said it the way he did
Mm-hmm.
left no wiggle room for some people.
Right.
Not even some. I'm sorry, that's even wrong to say. To say that most people were drunk off their ass for the first, X amount of years, that's bullcrap. It's complete bullcrap. and yet, and yet, there you have the video, and
And
people will repeat it.
that's why you have to be careful about what you when you make a statement, an unequivocal statement, a declaration of fact or a declaration of the truth, you had better be ready to back it up. And I don't care what it is. There are certain facts that we just know. Water is wet, fire is hot. They can't be denied. Yes, you can show the science, but do you need to really? Maybe you might once in a while, but anything else is pretty much, I mean, look at how much has changed. Things that we thought were a fact that we were taught 10 years ago have turned out to be completely wrong. They call that the half life of facts. In that, even if you go to medical school now, most, not all, but most medical students are taught that a good percentage of what they're being taught today will found will be found to be false or incorrect in some way within 10 years. So there are certain occupations, certain fields where research has to keep moving forward because we're discovering what we know and what we don't know. I'll give you one. Have you ever heard that we humans only use 10% of our brain?
Yeah, that's bullcrap.
That was a twisted misquote. There was a medical doctor, well, this is back in the 1600s, I want to say, who actually said you can't really go explore a brain because a person kind of needs it while they're alive. So the only way they can learn about a brain is patching up damaged ones. And it's still pretty much in that realm today. You can't just basically open up an otherwise healthy person and start poking around. What he said was the human brain is so wondrous, we only know about what 10% of it does. And that got twisted and misquoted so many times that you hear it today as we only use about 10% of our brain, when that is not what he said at all. But if you say it often enough, it becomes the truth
Well,
to the masses.
many conversations sit at the generalized, colloquial, or pop culture understanding of things, and people agree to any number of truisms that aren't actually true, but since they're so commonplace, they're just accepted as such.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where conversations average, as far as I've seen, take place. What's odd is for conversations to really nail something down, um, and that's viewed as an extreme
Mm-hmm.
thing to do because the uncomfortability of,
Maybe we've been wrong. Yeah.
yeah, that uncomfortability of that possibility is a little bit of an uncomfortable thing. But um, we mostly agree to these popular sayings and notions to get on with life on a day to day, be it at the store
Yeah.
or some other something or other, um, because you're just really not going to nail it down. Um, but under there's more to things than just the average thing. But as far as like that video, which is kind of what we're saying, um, it wasn't false completely. It just wasn't true completely. He probably, I don't know this for a fact, but if I'm thinking at his better angels, he probably saw a really cool freaking historical bit,
Mhm.
and he did a bit on it.
And
And
extrapolated from there. Yeah.
and but the missing, and anybody that sees it that's borderline just watching curiosities might see it, accept it as such,
Mm-hmm.
because he gave a good argument for it.
Sure.
and then he'll pass that on, and then that'll keep passing like
Well,
telephone. And so what ends up happening is that now you have this thing. But if somebody down that chain says, "Oh, wait a second," and it got to the point where that thing became a statue in a courtyard in a
mhm,
city of high importance where everybody accepted that notion,
mhm.
then a person coming along and questioning such a fundamental accepted understanding would be liable to be stoned to death,
Yeah,
at worst.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can say, "Oh my gosh," you just have to be careful. The thing about only using 10% of your brain, you can see how the leap was made, and that's the whole problem. Is somebody says, "Well, we only know about 10% of it." Somebody making that leap to, "Well, we only use 10% of it." Well, no, that's not what he said, and that's not what he meant. But you could see how somebody would make that leap or
Yeah.
make that mistake. But you also have to take in human nature. It's also on the presentation. For instance, if somebody's on TV, some celebrity who is normally up on stage singing, doing whatever, is talking about a new headache tablet that will get rid of your headache, in less than 5 minutes. Are you going to believe them over somebody in a lab coat with a name tag and maybe a pair of glasses and a stethoscope hanging around their neck? Odds are that person is not a doctor. They're just an actor, but an actor that you don't recognize from something. So, but who are you going to believe? Probably lean more towards the person in the lab coat because it looks more official. It looks like there's more knowledge behind it than some dude who's used to screaming into a microphone, you know.
Yeah.
So it's also in presentation.
Would you here's a question. Would you rather be taken care of operation like um by a blind doctor
Mhm.
or a seeing citizen with with fair intelligence? Blind doctor?
Depends on what it is. If it's for a set of headphones, either one's good enough for
No,
me.
a medical thing. You
Oh,
have the
okay.
choice
See,
of a
well,
blind doctor.
if he's blind but he's still a doctor, doesn't mean he's stupid, you know.
No, an
So
operation.
yeah, it's kind of so
No, but
it's
that's a it's a very almost impossible decision to make
mhm.
because
Well,
the faculty that the normal citizen has, which is his vision,
mhm.
is something that the blind doctor, as brilliant as he is, because he is in fact a doctor, but without that missing ingredient that's available to most people, um, the task at hand becomes
well it
more problematic,
well
even though he has the skill set. Let's say,
it depends on what it is. If it's a new headache tablet, I've got no opinion because they could both be right. If it's a new set of contact lenses, I'm going with the guy who can see. It just depends on what's being hawked out there. You know what I
again,
mean?
they're gonna cut your butt in half. You have the choice of. The point is,
Well, I get what your point is, and you're right. And that was basically my point because you have a position of
yeah, I
authority,
could
but
see that. I could
something's
see what you're saying.
missing.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, I could see what you're saying. Yeah, um,
so
there's
if
need.
look if you're sitting at a picnic table with another dude in the park, and the dude looks over at you and said, "Scientists have shown that a duck's quack will not echo. Okay, well, that's you two sitting there on a at a picnic table. You can believe or disbelieve, based on what he tells you. But if you're sitting in an audience at a scientific lecture and this guy with more letters after his name than are actually in his name is reading from the lectern, and he says we have determined after careful study and years of research that the quack of a duck does not echo, that carries a little bit more weight. Never mind the fact that sound is sound and it, by God, does echo. Depending upon where you are in the setting and who's doing the presentation, you may be willing to believe it, or at least give it a little bit more weight than some sitting two stools down from you at the bar. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, um, there's lots of things that we see that we accept, like that video. Well, I didn't, um, where he said that about the water. But there's lots of things that we do accept that we wouldn't know the difference that we're accepting it or
yeah,
not because its initial claim is not true. But we wouldn't know it because we haven't questioned that one thing,
right,
one way or the other.
right.
Um,
Exactly. Whether you're in the park or you're sitting in the audience at that lecture, you may walk out the door never thinking about the quack of a duck in your life again. So you have that internal starch blocker that's you can either suspend belief or suspend disbelief at your leisure. Somebody once asked Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, one day, said, when you watch these science fiction movies and you see a ship shoot a laser at one and it goes boo, and the other one blows up boom, and it goes around and you hear whoosh, does that bother you? There's no sound in space. You can't hear a laser fire. You can't hear an explosion. You can't hear engines. There's no sound in space. It's a vacuum. Does that bother you? He says, look, I have gone to the movies to watch a movie about a talking raccoon who flies spaceships. If I can believe that for the duration of this movie, that other stuff doesn't bother me at all.
yeah, you have to suspend this belief when watching movies because, I mean, without that, you're basically going on a little fairy tale.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So
you
it's
sort
like,
of have to.
you're willing to believe that there's a raccoon that can talk, who can fly a spaceship and launch artillery from said spaceship, but it pisses you off that you can hear the other ship explode? Really? That's what you're going to hang this up on? Come on, man.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have that point of reference. Any, we have to suspend this belief because it's not like because when you watch a movie like so everything we take a lot for granted um constantly, but we have to take things for granted in order to get somewhere
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Because if we began our journey with um sort of clearing up all the different thoughts and words that follow in order to explain something or some sort of whatever um we'd have to spend our lifetime doing that to just say I'd like a medium coke and a burger um
Yeah.
because even within that sentence we take a lot for granted anyways. So yeah, we have to suspend this belief if we want to get on with a movie but the problem is when in that conversation of a lot of accepting things at face value,
Mhm.
if one of the participants has questioned X amount of things
Hmm.
that are brought up, that's when you get into the thing. Now, that's when you get into it because they may stop you, which happens to all of us. I've been stopped a million times by you in many cases, um, to point something out. Um, and this goes to what we've talked about a few episodes back last year, late last year, where how many forks on the road are there, and what to disregard and not in any
Hmm.
given scenario,
Right.
um, depends on where what what you're looking at and the context of the situation at the
And
time,
what you're looking for, yes.
and whatever that means in
Hmm.
context of that. But there is the ability to get lost, and it's not
Right.
lost. It's even saying the word lost is it's better to be said. It's easy to get found or to find yourself in the weeds of clarity, but it's still the weeds. So it's a confusing thing because there's a lot of
Yeah. Because it depends
context.
on what your end goal is. If your end goal is to get from point A to point B, but you keep getting distracted along C, D, E, F, and G, you may never get to B. And if that was the priority, sometimes you do need to focus. You can always come back and explore those other things. And that's where a lot of our scientific breakthroughs come from, is because people were so hell bent on getting from point A to point B, they discovered there may be a C, D, E, or F over here, but had to stay focused on getting to B. And other people have come along and taken that C road or that D road or both. It's if you look at just in medicine alone, so many of the things that we have now were accidental, just kind of serendipitous discoveries while they were in the pursuit of something else. So, uh, from the simple and silly up to the dramatic, and very important, depending upon who you are, all along the way, there have been accidental discoveries and serendipitous discoveries for doing just what you're saying, trying to get from A to B and getting sidetracked in C or D and discovering something else.
Yeah, that's also part of the
Mhm.
that happens a lot. There's a lot of examples of that. I mean, I can't think of one right now, so I'm not gonna try
Well,
it, but there are.
I'll give you one on the silly and stupid side. There was a chemist working for 3M. No, Scotch. Scotch. He was trying to come up with an industrial adhesive, and he was mixing this and mixing that, and his first round failed. It was a massive failure. It couldn't, the glue would not hold. It would hold temporarily, and if you set it down it would be just fine, but the minute you put any pressure on it at all, it just fell apart.
Yeah,
Well, he decided to make the best of a bad situation, and he had notes stuck up all over the place. Well, he decided to take a little bit of this adhesive and brush it on the top edge of some paper, and he stuck it all together and trimmed it up. And he would peel it off, write a note on it, peel it off, and stick it on the wall or stick it on his table or wherever. Well, a couple of other people saw that and were like, hey, make me some of them. That's cool. And pretty soon, secretaries in the office were going, make me some of them, make me some of them. And pretty soon, some of the higher ups said, hey, what is that you developed? And there is the post it note that we use today. It was completely accidental, it was unintentional. And the guy was kind of hard pressed to remember how the hell he had screwed it up to make that weak adhesive that does what it needs to do temporarily.
yeah,
And that's where post it notes came from. He didn't get to point B with that invention, but he eventually did get to point B and create his industrial adhesive.
yeah. I mean that's the perfect example right there. Um, so so yeah, when we're when we hear something like that, like um, uh, the drinking in the Middle Ages or whatnot,
Yeah.
and everybody was drunk.
Hmm.
It's easy to just because it's a nice story.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's a nice
Well,
story because you can imagine people walking around just freaking, all
believing it.
inebriated.
Yeah.
But um,
Maybe that's why they were called the Dark Ages, because nobody can remember anything. They were all in a blackout, you know?
but I mean, believing something as so. Anyway, so I'll tell you the one bit that. So I saw a video,
Well,
which
but before we do, I would like to go back and revisit something because I've
okay,
seen a couple of comments out here.
okay,
I mentioned the ducks quack and echoing.
hmm
And I said, sound is sound, it has an echo. And Marsh came in and said, but is it true? And Jim says, until you're near water with rock cliffs a distance away and you hear it yourself. Had you ever heard that urban myth that a duck's quack has no echo?
hmm
You had heard that?
hmm
There was a professor by the name of Trevor Cox. He's an acoustics researcher at the University of Salford in the UK. And in 2003, he was puzzled when he began to hear on TV and radio programs that a duck's quack didn't echo and nobody knew the reason why. Now, this was his area of expertise. So he got a hold of this duck and immediately named it Daisy and recorded the sounds that this duck makes just out in the wild with no echo. It was a domestic duck, little white one. And so he recorded it. Then he took Daisy into an anechoic chamber, which is a space that's designed to suppress all sound reflection. The walls and everything around it are there to absorb sound and not allow it to echo. And he recorded her again. Then he put her in an anechoic chamber, which is a chamber that is designed to reflect all sound and make it louder and reverberate really, really loud, and recorded her quack there. Each of these attempts took several hours because how do you get a duck to quack on cue? Then he took her back out in an area next to a, how did they put it here? Um, where'd he go?
then he made sweet and
He took her to an area with a, oh, come on.
then he made sweet and sour duck after.
I don't know about that. Um, um, okay. Yes, he took it to an area where close to a cliff and recorded the duck and was able to isolate through all the waveforms on all these different sound samples and was able to prove that a duck's quack does indeed echo. Now, here's the funny part about this. This was done in 2003. So it's not like this was done in the 50s or the 40s. This was done in 2003. And no, Daisy the Duck went back to the owner.
But what
So
was the answer then?
that a duck's quack definitely does have an echo, just like any other sound. A sound is a sound. He was able to bring up the waveforms in computer software, isolate them, and then isolate the original quack and prove that it was indeed an echo.
Well, that ruined that one because I kind of like that one.
Yeah.
I kind of
So,
like the fact that or the notion
but
that
it's one of those things that if you say it often enough, you'll go, oh, okay, and they don't even question it.
yeah, it just becomes part of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a lot of things like that, dude.
Hmm.
Especially in the area that I've been studying for the past few years. But
Oh
anyways,
yeah.
let me bring this bit up. I ran into a video which you have in your sounds like quackery.
Yeah. You know.
Um, let me bring up this one thing. So I ran into a video that you had queued up, or somewhere in
I
your.
I have queued up. I haven't watched it yet. But yeah.
So the video is there's lots of confusion about where the South, talking about the United States, actually is. Where does it begin? What's included in it and what's not?
Hmm.
And they go through the South through historical times in terms of, as it went across the ages.
Hmm.
But modern, what do we think the South is, and this and that and whatnot.
Hmm.
And so everybody had issues of their own making, depending on where you're talking about.
Hmm.
Like, so some places on the northern part are questionable to many people that live in that area, depending on what kind of culture you have going on there.
Right.
Um, and then, but my focus was on the South and the reaction to the South. And so, um, they questioned Florida,
Yeah.
and he brings it up in the video. He says, "Well, there's a large Latin influx that is in the South, so it has its own Caribbean feel. It's got like all the things that we usually."
Yeah.
And so, and they're questioning through, and so in the comments. But now the question is, what is the South? What and the question is, what do you mean by the South
Right.
exactly? Like, how Jordan Peterson, which I have, it's a dual-edged sword because I've seen things that, then again, who am I to? But yes, I know what I'm. So but he always says, what exactly? What do you? Because when you ask a question, it's good to be exact over. I mean, if you want the closest truth to a thing, what is the definition exactly of what you're referring to as best you can have it,
Right.
in order to then determine, so in the question of what is the South, my assumption is the cultural one that we grew up with, pop culture wise and otherwise, in terms of, but these are organic things, right? So,
Hmm.
um and I'll explain why. But to me, the South, and I wrote a comment on it. So if you run across it, you'll see my comment. But I added a little tidbit of my comment was, to me, something to the effect of, to me, we're talking about the popular culture concept of what most people growing up in this country would assume. Again, according to TV, radio, and
Yeah.
and and and,
Movies.
and stuff like that, and historical things, and
Hmm.
food and stuff. So I said it's to do with ribs coleslaw. It's to do with small town living, as opposed to, it's like I went down a list of things that
Hmm.
sort of go in the direction of Little House on the Prairie,
Hmm.
although that's one sampling of, but that's the notion. It's sort of the barometer is sort of in that area, but there's other reasons too for what the South is in terms of the mind. But those are kind of good points of that. What falls outside of that concept is the Spanish world. And I believe it's due to the same old thing of, it's not contextualized within popular culture in the way it actually was properly. So our American reference point is what we get fed,
Hmm.
which is true for any other place according to what other people get fed in their locales. So Miami, and people in the comments were saying, well, no, Miami, you might as well be in Cuba and stuff. And um, so, well, anyways, I'll leave it at that. I have a side branch answer to all this, but um, the South. Do you have the same image as I do of what I would assume you do? But you tell
Well,
me.
It depends because there is a lot of, and we see Dan kind of getting in here too, saying Florida's not the South. It's a weird a swampy Spanish place that Disney bought and now is a crazy free place. That's my simplistic view of Florida because I think it depends on how you're talking about it. Do you mean geographically? Geographically, you can't get any further south than Florida unless you want to talk about Hawaii. Now, is Hawaii the South? Is Arizona the South?
Well, that's the Southwest.
Is New Mexico the South? I
No, we're
mean,
talking about the
well,
American South.
understood. But what I'm getting at is if you mean geographically, yes, Florida is the South. If you mean culturally, a certain portion of Florida is culturally the South.
Well, that's what I'm asking. What is the definition to you of what is required
Well,
for it being the South and it being not the South?
there's still a lot of debate on that because there are people who would argue that Texas is part of the South, and there are other people that would argue it isn't, that the
But if
South ends at the Louisiana border.
but if Dan Harju, I know that's not what you're saying, but it could cross reference. I understand what he's saying
Hmm.
in the context of the popular culture thing, but if Dan Harju is saying that Florida is not the South, it's a weird, swampy Spanish thing. In that sentence, swampy can be found in other parts of the South, so that's not the qualifier for exempting it from the South. Spanish is because he's adding Spanish as opposed to not Spanish,
Hmm.
and that's what I understand our popular notion to. So I'm not critiquing Dan. I'm using him as what he said as an example that that's the popular notion.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you, um, like that's my notion in terms of the pop notion. So I'm asking you, what are the qualifiers and things that need be disqualified for it to be included as the South? Or what
Um,
are your thoughts? I mean, can you do that? And aside from that,
well, that's what I was getting at was if you're talking about geographically, Florida is part of the South. If you're talking culturally, it's not. Certain parts are, certain parts ain't. You get
explain
around, well, you get up in the panhandle where you're there with Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. It's very similar. It's very, very similar.
that. No, but define
Let
because
me
you.
let me get there. Let me get there. But when you get further down into central Florida, you get less and less of that southern influence, and the cultures, that's where they start to blend. And then by the time you get down to South Florida, it's a completely different culture. You get into that Miami, um, heavily Cuban influenced culture. It's a dip. You from Jacksonville to Miami is two completely different cultures, even though they're within the same state. Okay. The culture of the South to me is a lot of what you said as far as more small town, but that doesn't explain the whole thing. It's more an attitude, it's more a independent spirit, I guess, would be the easiest way to say it. And that a lot of self reliance for the better and for the worst, because a lot of self pride as well, being too proud to ask for help, rather do it on my own. And we can see just in looking around in a few places that don't quite work out all that well. But I don't know, it's very, very difficult to put any kind of thing that you can point your finger at and say this is the South because there's so many variables.
But
But it is an attitude. It is an attitude.
well, that's a good for. So that's a good answer, although it's basically up in the air what you're saying. So it's never honed
It,
in.
it,
No,
it
never,
it
never.
is. It
Well, no,
is
let me say.
because a southerner from Georgia is completely different from a southerner in Alabama. And a lot of that is regional differences. Some of it may be background, but just a quick example. If you want to start a fight, start talking about barbecue because no two regions do it the same. So, but then again, barbecue as a subject is very Southern. So you can't really point one and say, yeah, this is it. No, this isn't it. Uh, there's so many variables.
You know it when you see it.
Yeah, it's a real homespun, almost not Norman Rockwell. He was Northeast, but it's this homespun kind of Pollyanna feel to it, where the pace of life is more or less very slow, and folks just aren't in that big a hurry until you get on the road in Atlanta. Then you're on your own.
One of the one of the distinctions is that in popular culture, and as we've all been trained,
Mm,
is that the when it comes to Spanish, that's not the South. In a general sense, culturally, and so on. What is the South is this tradition going back in time, infused with all the things you just mentioned and the things that I mentioned. A historical thing in the context of the United States that's very American in the United States, and Spanish doesn't quite get there.
mhm,
And that's the popular notion, according to what we've been handed down, even myself,
mhm,
from my position in the United States, from Miami, Florida. That's my notion growing up, watching Don Knotts
mhm.
on,
Mayberry, yeah,
and every other thing that you were exposed to and such.
yeah,
However, um, there's obvious truth to that, but it's not true at the same time. This is
mhm,
another issue, just like getting drunk all the time, every time,
mhm,
across the Middle Ages and into colonial eras, because the water was tainted. It's true in some things, in some situations, but not true in others. For instance, um, the first people to entrench themselves in the United States, in what would be the United States, were the Spanish.
mhm,
Louisiana culture is the South. Well, the first people to get there were the Spanish and the French, apart from the natives that lived there. The Spanish and the French, not just the French, as we've talked about in the past.
right.
And this is news to me, going on 3 years or so now,
Mhm,
because I never focused on it. But it just so happens that the first people were the Spanish and the French, Canary Islanders,
yeah,
and French from France, not from Canada. Third came the French from Canada. But the music that people that that's very southern in its specific, like you said before,
mhm,
there's different versions of the South within the South, and I think that
yeah,
that's more correct than anything. But the Cajun music
mhm,
that we think of as French, yeah, it's French. But the earliest stars in that, going back. In fact, I'm friends with one of the grandchildren of those, and he's a Canary. He's the descendant of Canary Islanders. They
mhm,
were Spanish people. Um, in the South, in the Louisiana area, Spanish people in Alabama, in Mississippi, all throughout the South. Um, Part of the South, contributing to the South in the Civil War, the Spanish people, um, colonels, lieutenants, and so on. Um, Plus French people. The country grew up around different things, and so but it was incorporated into the South, into the bigger body of the South, so that it it basically awashes within itself, and it's
yeah.
its own thing that we know of,
It all blended in there. Yeah.
right? But people don't know that. People people Many people don't know that. I didn't know that until I started actually reading about it. Um, it's but Miami is an overwhelming concentration of Spanish, and so it has its own culture that's different from that in the ways
Well,
that we've mentioned, be it food
that's
or
true.
so I understand what they're saying, but when I saw the video, like I understand what they're saying. I understand what Harju's saying, what Harneil's saying, what you're saying, like because we grew up in the same context as far as the country.
Well, but you also have to remember that when I was growing up, everything south of Daytona Beach was being portrayed as glamorous. This is where the beautiful people go to play. It was an onshore version of all of the Caribbean paradises that you could dream about but never go to. This was a place that you could go and you could rub elbows with the beautiful people. This is the playground of the stars. They lived in Beverly Hills or they lived in New York, but when they wanted to make a break and go out and cut loose and get wild, they went to South Florida, everything south of Daytona Beach. And
Yeah,
Jackie Gleason was like the master of ceremonies for that lifestyle.
yeah,
Miami was portrayed as 100% glitz and glamour. It was Vegas before Vegas was Vegas, you know? So that right there just kind of crushed any kind of image of that being part of the South, especially having a mother and a grandmother from Texas and a grandfather from Oklahoma. That was the South. Miami wasn't the South. They may be down south, but it wasn't the attitude. It wasn't the homey feel of the South. See, when I think of the South, and I've lived in a few states down there, just about everywhere you go, you are welcomed like you're a member of the family. If a family invites you to come to their place for dinner, you damn sure better have a good reason for not accepting that invitation, number one. And the minute you walk in the door, it's like you're a family member that they haven't seen in years.
but that saying about that
Mm-hmm.
offer about that offering
Mm-hmm.
is not exclusive to the South.
No, I know it's not, but that's what I'm getting at. It's a feel, it's a comfort.
Right. So my point is
Mm-hmm.
that there's lots of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you say the South, or I say the South, we all know what we mean
Mm-hmm.
because
But
it
it's hard to
means,
define.
well, no, we unless you say it geographically, like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Yeah.
or culinary. If you hone it in to specific things, but that bringing someone into your house for food
Mm-hmm.
is not exclusive to there's things that
No,
are
it's not.
right. So there's a whole host of things that are not exclusive to an
Mm-hmm.
area.
Right. But it's more indicative of that area is what I'm getting at. You
No,
know, I've
when
had
I'm
friends in California who treated me exactly the same way.
exactly, so you can't.
But what I'm getting at is overall in general in the South, you have that feel a heck of a lot more than you do out here on the West. Out here, people are a little bit colder, a little bit more detached, right? Um, and in their own heads, and too concerned with what's going on with them. Um, Down south, like I said, it's more relaxed, it's more comfy, more homey, and people aren't as uptight. Obviously, there are exceptions. You get to Birmingham or New Orleans or any of the major cities, it's gonna be different, but
Well, there's a
just by population density. But
well, so according to this conversation, the things that you've said and the things that people out there have said, Um, they have notions of what the South is,
Hmm.
but there's things that overlap, like you said before.
Sure.
But it means different things to different people in certain degrees.
Oh, sure.
You know,
Sure. It
to
always
one
will.
to one level or the other. Anyways,
Yeah.
I found it curious, and to finish off, the commentary below it,
Hmm.
people were some people from South Florida
Hmm.
that aren't part of the Hispanic uh, world
Yeah.
were like, no, we're South as well, but they're surrounded by not South, let's say, according to our but they're defending the South because people have passionate thoughts on these things as well. But
Right.
the consensus, if you read down the thing, many of them um, were clear that that's not the South. My only addition to it is that with the missing context of disqualifying South Florida, which I think is fine. I personally think it's fine because it's not my picture in my movie head of what the South is. I'm in line with what you guys are saying. But my extra added caveat is that they're saying that disregarding, unbeknownst to them, the actual history of the frickin' United States.
Right.
Um, that is my extra notion. So to you can say Spanish culture, this and that, is not in line with the traditional South, but don't you think for a moment that you know the history of what the hell you're talking about? Because you don't. Because
There's a
there is
lot you're not being that you weren't taught. Absolutely.
that you weren't taught, so you don't know
Hmm.
the context. So don't think this thing here, as crazy as it is, because it is crazy different. I agree completely. Freaking, I live in Miami. I can tell you 100 million times over how it's quite different than some rural place somewhere
Hmm.
out, wherever. But I mean, I'm basically, I was thinking when I was watching that, okay, but get a freaking clue too. So don't disregard um, Spanish history within the context of the United States because it grew up around a lot of people that contributed to the country
Or
before any of these people were even a thought in their great grandparents'
French history or German history or any of the other Europeans that came over as well, because it all amalgamated to make it what it is.
yeah, but I'm talking about South
Right.
Florida and I'm talking about specifically the Spanish.
Hmm.
I'm talking about it because of the video and the comments referring to
Right.
South
Understood.
Florida specific.
Understood.
But but so that was my extra little context, which I found a thing to think
I.
about. Our flag is the Spanish cross of Burgundy. Florida's
Mm.
flag,
Mm.
the cross, that's Spanish. It's embedded in there to recount the memory
Hmm.
of how this all got started. So there is a history of this before the South was the South, you know. And so I just that extra context, but I agree with your guys' answers. Plus, it's sort of a moving picture, a moving organic thing of depending on what people focus
Well,
on. But I
and
agree with it.
it also gets muddy the further north you go, because where's the dividing line? But Jim Dockrell has a good
Yeah,
one here. He says, so grits and biscuits and gravy. Yeah, if you're eating grits and biscuits and gravy, you're in the South.
I eat grits, biscuits, and well, not as of late, but
But
I grew up eating that.
then he made a mistake and he said for breakfast. In some places, that's all 3 meals a day. So, just depends on which trailer park you're in, Jim. Um, but yeah, you get outside of the South, you won't find grits in most places.
We have it here.
Well, you're in the South. But what I'm getting at is you get out here. Like, for instance, I couldn't tell you anywhere here locally where I could get grits. I can't think of a restaurant that serves them.
You can buy it at the store.
You have to ask for it.
Really?
Yeah. I like if I go to my local Wally World, they don't have grits.
I mean, it's not, but it's a good point. because grits is something with
It's
butter and
regional.
whatnot. Um,
Hmm.
but the stores, I wouldn't know otherwise because it's you can get it anywhere, but it's not your traditional, let's say, Cuban dish.
Hmm.
But that's not true either, because there's a Cuban equivalent to grits, which is simply grits.
Hmm.
So that see
It's
that's the
well, it's like
that's the
polenta, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
But see, that's the thing, that there's a lot of things that are not exclusive to a particular concept. But if you nail it down, if you try to look for the South, I mean, we all have the same impressions. I think of the Civil War, like Steve was saying in one
Hmm.
comment.
Yeah.
And yes, there was Civil War, there was the North,
Hmm.
but I kind of always,
But
end up thinking of those.
that's a
Like,
fine line as well. I think you would probably agree that Fredericksburg, Virginia, was the South.
yeah,
At least I would think of it.
yeah, but not everybody thinks that way.
But what about Ocean City, Maryland? I wouldn't
Maryland's supposed to
think
be.
I wouldn't think of Maryland at all as being in the South.
The reason that that is,
And I wouldn't think of Delaware as being in the South.
the reason that that
Hmm.
is because DC is in Maryland. And DC was, at least for me, I can
Well,
see where this would go. Well, let me just say that because DC, the center of power that fought the South, is there, I believe that it's not unreasonable to think that Southerners would discount it as part of the South in
well,
that context.
the reason I say that is because Ocean City, Maryland is actually closer to Atlantic City, New Jersey, than it
Mhm.
is to Fredericksburg, Virginia, even though they are right on the same latitude.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we lived in Tennessee. A lot of people would consider Kentucky to be the South,
Mhm.
depending upon where you are in Kentucky. You know, Indiana, they wouldn't consider Indiana to be the South, but a good percentage of Kentucky is north of India, of the southern Indiana border. You know, it just it gets blurry when you get up there, is what I'm getting at. You know,
There's a
there's
geographical, like you said
yeah,
before, and then
there's no doubt that Tennessee is in the South. There's some debate on Kentucky, but there really isn't, that I've ever heard, a debate about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois. You know,
there's the Midwest thing too. But
right.
there there's a geographic thing that comes out from the United States government, and that delineates the official thing in terms of the government's reckoning
Mhm.
over those boundaries. But the people, the citizenry, and the government don't always agree,
Right.
even though it's official, of what's what. The gray areas, over who's more country than not, or who's
Yeah.
more south than not, and such, and this and that, is up to each area's
Yeah.
people's thinking and so on. But within that, there's things that people grew up on, I'm assuming, like any other person would grow up on, that were so specific and treasured to them in their hometowns, that they qualify it as part of the South in the
Mhm.
context of them. And so, but some things, like like what you were saying with, I think you were saying, welcoming somebody into your house,
Mhm.
that is completely applicable for the South, or at least the vision of the South that we see. I mean, I couldn't, but it's also applicable outside of the South. So
Oh, sure.
things like,
Yeah, it really is. But I meant the overall in general attitude
no, I know the
because,
general, but I'm being
yeah.
specific. Spec- it's going to be left undone. But my point was that there are things that are specifically, without exception, part of the South, that's
Hmm.
not part of anything outside of the South. And those things could be branded as purely the South. And what are those things then? And that's kind of my, what was my question within the context of the I don't know what that is because I think
Yeah, I
things.
don't think you can. I don't think you can point to it. I don't think it's anything, and that's why I said it's mainly attitude, because
Yeah,
I don't think that there is any one thing that you can point to. Some might say
yeah.
country music, some might say little white churches. I warn any of my friends going to the South at all. If you go into Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, do not use a little white church as a landmark because you could go in any direction.
A lot of churches. That's what the video said. Um,
But there are a lot of churches all over the place. I mean,
that's
there
the
are a ton of churches here,
that's
but
the thing.
the South is a little bit different in that you will drive down a two-lane highway and not be anything for miles, just open fields. And then suddenly there's a gravel lot with a little white church. You ain't seen a house in 20 miles, but there's a church there. So just because you can't see the houses don't mean the houses ain't there. That's what I'm getting at. And there are churches like that all over the damn place. So don't use a church as a landmark because you could be wrong on so many levels.
If somebody like in that chat,
Hmm.
and this is speaking in the context of everything we're talking about, but also
Hmm.
in that context of things we take for granted as a
Hmm.
given,
Yeah.
um, and defend the given to the death, sensationalistically saying, um, but we never sit to actually like parse it out and
Hmm.
see exactly what's what. Um, we live in the context of the South or the notion of the South in our heads, if I can boldly say, with all those things taken into consideration, geography, plus the food, plus the churches and
Hmm.
long distances, hillsides and forests, all these things together, but included heritage too.
Oh yeah. Well,
It, well, yeah, there's
depends
a
on where
video.
you're at. Depends on where you are, but yeah.
Heritage is important for the South. I mean, that's part of our popular cultural
Well, it depends, but
understanding.
it depends on where you're at. I mean, because like you get into the Appalachians, the heritage there is completely different from, say, Greensboro, North Carolina, which is different from Miami, which is different from New Orleans. So it is
But
regional as well.
it doesn't. Yeah, that's doesn't change what the fact that heritage in the southern context is
Hmm.
part of it. It's part of it.
Yeah,
There's a video where the
yeah.
guy, there's a clip somewhere where he's holding uh, a a Confederate, the Dixie. He's holding it
Hmm.
and he's arguing with a whole group. They're fighting verbally. Like, why do you? I think it was had to do with statues and such. And he said, and the guy says, well, this flag, don't you know that that's blah 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 blah. And the guy holding the flag, he said, my my ancestors fought to to defend this flag. It's my ancestors fought in our to protect our farm and so, like he was very passionate about something from the 1800s, which is his
Sure.
direct ancestry and stuff. And these people were questioning over the thing. Well, he's speaking on family heritage
Yeah,
and all these things, and so it is a big part of it, like any other
sure.
place, like you were
And
saying.
and
But
and that's what I was getting at about pride too.
there's a specific thing that
Hmm.
includes that. For
Hmm.
goodness sakes, there was also a war,
Hmm.
a civil war. So there's all these things in context. But I am sorry, not to you. I'm just saying with the notion of this, Florida was quite very much so part of the Civil War. It didn't see all the action in the context
It's
of
all
whatnot,
it
but
saw its
Florida,
share, but yeah, you're right.
well, yeah, and soldiers came and entrenched themselves here in
Mm.
order to avoid the war from both sides, as an example.
Yep.
And there was Indians, natives that were here too, and there was attacks on citizenry here in Florida, and there's a whole history in Florida. I'm
Hmm.
sorry to say, and many of those residents here were Spanish. And but the context of South and all that. in the context of that video, and it is the notion that even I understand growing up, is that it's a combination of all these things minus and so you have Miami, but Miami is a different phenomenon altogether. It's overwhelmingly not the South in terms of culture as we understand it. But I found the whole thing curious in the context of like, um, yeah, all that we've been saying. I found it a curious little conversation.
Yeah. That just I thought of another Southern thing that will help you identify sweet tea. Sweet tea is a Southern thing. Anywhere else in the country, if you want sugar in your tea, you got to add it yourself. Now, here lately, there are exceptions to that because that is starting to spread a little bit more than it did in like the 80s or 90s. But it's just within the last 10 to 12 years I've noticed it that you're getting more sweet tea out here.
We
Before
grew up
that, if you wanted sugar in your tea, you added it yourself.
we grew up drinking sweet tea here
Mm-hmm.
in Sweetwater.
Yeah, we didn't.
But the problem is, if you think about it too, is well, in the context of Sweetwater,
Mm-hmm.
there was more than just the Hispanic culture here,
Oh
and
yeah,
there still is to this day.
yeah.
It's an amalgamation of different things. So we get what you would see in a big city, which is a bunch of different stuff that overlaps and whatnot, and this and
Right.
that. So it's weird because again, like you said, you couldn't get any further south than South Florida, or Florida in
Not in the
itself,
continental United States. Yeah.
not in the continent. But at the same time, what is that thing that is uniquely? Honestly, without beating a dead horse, I would end up having to fall back on these things that we're saying, that
Mm-hmm.
it's a combination of certain things, and we know it when we see it, when we focus on it, that this represents the South. It's
Mm-hmm.
many things, and in truth, if you think about it like anything else, it's the lives of people that grew up in this geographic area, and there are many experiences and things, be it crafts, be it
Mm-hmm.
religion, be it heritage, be it all these things. It's all these things coming along for the ride, creating a history. So it's not something you could point out. So when I ask the question, is there something singularly that you can reference to say this is, I don't know if that's possible.
You'd be hard pressed to do it. You could give a bunch of small examples,
Yeah.
like we were talking about grits and biscuits and gravy and sweet tea. Well, there's country ham and red eye gravy. There's deviled crab, chess pie. There is all kinds of stuff that
Yeah.
uh, is indicative of the South, but not exclusively of the South. But when you put all those things together, you can't help but think the South.
And I couldn't help to think of the South as well. Just the same, because it's that thing. But anyways, it was a cool. He did a good job in the video because he
Well,
wasn't being, um uh what's the word,
he wasn't being derogatory or insulting at all or
no,
anything.
no, no, he was laying it out like, hey, these are the things that are going on. And in the comments, people were out saying, "Oh no, well, I'm from here, or I'm from there, or I'm from here, and we're
Yeah.
the South." And this, and it was not bad. It was nice, but but um, I found it super interesting from my reference point,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is from Miami looking out,
Hmm.
probably the furthest south other than the Keys in the United States, and reading people saying that no, it's not the South. In fact, they'll go further, um, and they'll say this is North Havana, not the United States. Just about, they would say, and we've heard that, like, we all know that here because it's something
Hmm.
we all joke about, like, oh, we're in northern Havana right now, and stuff like that. Like, we'll joke about that here.
Hmm.
Um, because you can't avoid not to see the cultural difference, which is
Yeah.
quite striking.
And that's what I think it comes down to is culture.
Right.
I think it comes down to culture.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's completely striking,
mhm.
even for me living here.
Mhm.
How can I say that and yet it be true at the same time? It's
Well,
funny.
but
It's funny. It's funny, but it's true. It's hilarious.
yeah, and there's things like that all over the place. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
But could you say that there's a difference between, I don't know if this is going to get in the weeds, but the South and the Midwest? I mean, there is
Yeah,
differences.
there are a lot of differences, and it has to do with cultures. It has to do with cultures.
It's got a southern, I don't want to say it that way. It's got a country, rural vibe,
Yes,
which is common.
right. But
Of,
I can tell you, as a guy that grew up in the country, well, that still more or less lives in the country, country does not equal southern.
right.
There's country all over the place. I mean, you'll find country if you get 10 miles out of town.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
country does not equal southern. Yeah, there are places in southern Indiana that are seriously country, but they are not the South. That's Midwest. It's a different vibe. It's a different people. It's a different cuisine. It's a different whole different feel. You know,
Yeah,
um, it may be just as I mean, Aurora, Indiana, may be just as rural as Dover, Tennessee, but they're worlds apart. It's they're complete different things.
yeah. So you can't add the South bit, but you can sort of
But
say a more country,
yes,
rural, because country doesn't necessarily, no, country does not indicate the South. The South is
right.
a geographic plus all those
Well,
things we were talking about.
it's hard to get more country than anywhere in Wyoming. There's less than 1 million people in the entire state. Okay,
Yeah.
Wyoming highway patrolmen will pull you over because they're lonely. It's almost that bad. So when you've got 4 times more cows than you have people, the whole state is country. Even the capital is country, you know,
But
but it's not Southern by any stretch of the imagination. You could say it's cowboy, but it's not country. Or
although
excuse me, it is country, but it's not Southern.
although cowboy, see, this is the thing, that these things do have crossovers in subtle ways, but you could say in some cases, wait a second, let me ask you this. This is all depending
Mhm.
on our point of view, even though we may have a communal
Sure.
American understanding of it. Cowboy, see, this is going to be tough. You tell me. Cowboy, it doesn't have to mean the South, but
No,
it can mean the South if you're talking about,
if you're in the South,
right. So you could have a Wyoming cowboy easy,
oh, you got tons of Wyoming cowboys and Montana cowboys and Idaho cowboys, but they're
right?
not Southern.
But they're not Southern.
Right.
Exactly. So it's an
Yeah.
interesting overlap of this thing called cowboy, which is,
Yeah.
a herder.
Hmm.
Um, but the South encompasses part parts of cowboy country, like
Yeah.
Texas and
Yeah.
so on.
Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Arkansas, Kansas, parts of Nebraska, Oklahoma, all of that.
Yeah,
Um, but where did the cattle drives go to? They went up north, Colorado and Wyoming, because that's where the rail lines were, shipped their cattle back east.
and that's big time
That's where they did
cowboy.
the sell. They sell their cattle and ship them back east and go back home. You know.
Yeah, and that's cowboy, serious cowboy. I
Oh,
mean, if
that's major cowboy because yeah.
plus
You know, I mean, you
uh,
go to Wyoming, they got a cowboy on a Bronco on their license plates. A
yeah,
lot of ranches in Montana and Wyoming and Colorado. A lot of cattle ranches.
yeah, it's an interesting. So on the opposite, we do know big city when we see it
Hmm.
too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But
Yeah,
I would venture to say more than half of Southerners have never been on a horse. You know, just like more than half, probably three quarter. Well, no, I'll go further than that. Say probably 80% of West Coasters have never been on a horse. You know, so
and the West Coast is also something that, in my opinion, can't escape the cowboy aspect either.
well,
Nor
it.
the country, nor the countryside of it too. Although there's huge, massive metropolis cities,
Mhm.
but I'm sorry, but
Well, but it just
the open
depends. There are
spaces.
cowboys in Southern California. There are cowboys all over Nevada, in Las Vegas, in Reno, Lake Tahoe. There's cowboys in Salt Lake City and Denver. You know, they're not every cowboy lives a million miles away from civilization. It's just what do you do for a living? And if you
Yeah,
run a cattle ranch, you're pretty much a cowboy, you know. And that spreads up into Canada as well. I mean, anywhere out there on the plains where you can run cattle or you can, you know, run horses or whatever. Yeah, they're no less cowboys than some guy wearing a Stetson and uh, nice boots in Dallas.
Ju- in Scotland, I remember a video, a grainy, actually, uh, movie with Paul McCartney. He had had enough. The Beatles were on the outs, and he said, "I'm heading towards the country up north of Scotland, and I'm gonna live at country." And there's footage of him in the country up in Scotland. But I hate to say, I think it was more to do, at least in some, there were horses on, but it was more to do with sheep and such and this and that. But the country in context of, I know we're outside of the United States now in this thing, but the point is that's their equivalent of country. Although there's other parts down south, Wales and other parts, but
Mm-hmm.
this northern area, Scotland, um,
With the Heelan Coup,
it,
there's lots of beef up there too.
so they do have cattle up there.
Oh boy, do they ever! They have look up a Highland cow, and you're talking real wide horns and long fur, real long hair. It looks like a longhorn with a mullet. It really does. But and in the native they call them a Heeland Coo, which is a Highland cow.
Heelan Coup.
Mm-hmm. Heeland Coo.
But
Um,
cities ruin it all, though, in terms of some sort of,
there you go.
none of that.
Linda says, "Have you ever heard of Aberdeen Angus? They're from Scotland. That's a breed of cattle." Yeah. Linda watches. There's a movie that when it comes on the on demand, she'll watch it. And I don't know the title. And Linda, you'll have to fill it in. It's that movie. It's about cattle ranchers taking their herds for sale in Ireland and dealing with cattle rustlers in Ireland. So this is not a Texas thing.
Scenario only.
Yeah. Okay. The movie is called Durango.
Okay.
All right. And it's actually a pretty good flick, but it's weird to see. We're talking about, I did the stereotype of the cowboy wearing the Stetson hats and the nice boots. Well, it was weird to see these Irish cattle ranchers out there with the flat cap, you know, the roadster cap, and with a scarf and a walking stick. Not a horse nor a lariat in sight, just a complete, but they were just as much cowboys as any American wearing a Stetson.
They were
They
doing
were
it
doing
before us
exact
here.
same job. This movie is set back in the 30s, just before World War II. So it's actually a pretty good flick and worth a watch. It's called Durango.
Durango.
Yeah.
Where is it on?
Well, she watches it when it comes up on demand. Let me look for um and see, is it on YouTube or something like that? Yeah, in 1939, Ireland, a young man decides to lead a 40-mile cattle drive rather than selling his cattle to an unscrupulous local buyer. And I don't know if it is on. Yes, it's on YouTube. You
Okay.
can see it on YouTube.
Okay. If you can link it to me in my private whatnot thing,
Okay.
uh, I'll check it out.
Okay.
Is it a movie from the 2000s,
It was
1999?
made in 1999.
Okay.
So,
I mean, not that
um,
that has anything to do with it, but I'm just trying to judge the era just from the
it got, trying to see what the reviews were of it. Um, Google reviews gave it a 79 rating. IMDb gives it a 6.4 out of 10. I thought it was a good flick. I really did. I thought it was a good flick.
I'll definitely want. Since you shared one, I'll share another one. Although I don't know the name off unfortunately, but I have to tell you this thing. If you can find it, I don't know if you're even gonna like it, but there's a movie from Scotland
Mm-hmm.
that I saw earlier last year, and it was pretty freaking disturbing. I enjoyed the hell out of it, but I'll tell
Uh-oh.
you. Well, it was disturbing because it's actually it's not a horror movie,
Mm-hmm.
but it kind of is, but it's not. It's very weird. It was set in Ireland. I'm sorry, it was set in Scotland, not Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and it was this well mannered young man that had been living in the big city down south somewhere, and he came back home for a stay with his mom in the middle of the country out there, and
Mm-hmm.
he brought his brand new girlfriend
Okay.
from the city to visit mom and the family. And the whole thing is them driving out. You get the sceneries. It's very cool. It sets the tone. I don't want to kind of ruin it, but boy oh boy, they get there and they're living a normal or vacation time, but every little interaction with the locals, there's oddities. Like that you're in the country and everybody's acting weird, kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre type.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has a little bit. Well, let's put it. I don't want to ruin it, so I'll just leave it there. I'll try to find it and give you a. See, I don't want. But dude, it goes from, hey, we're visiting the folks out in the country to, ching 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 ching, in such a unique context of Scotland
Mm-hmm.
that you can't help but think, damn. I saw that earlier, and I meant to even tell you back when I saw it, but I just whoever history.
History. Martel and Eloy about a movie. Hey, I do watch them on occasion. Come on, get it up to there. I do watch them on occasion.
Well, um, anyways, it was a pretty good because it gives you that country vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and then all hell breaks loose, dude.
Yeah.
All hell break. But I can't tell you how
Well, if
because it
people are
would
getting
ruin it.
chopped up with axes and stuff like that, it's not my kind of flick. I
See,
just
but
don't
that's the whole
find it
problem.
entertaining.
That's the whole problem. It's not that,
Okay.
but but it has that at the very end. The whole
Okay.
movie is an exploration of the area,
Mm-hmm.
but then I can't even explain it correctly in order for you to under. It was a great freaking movie. Let's put it. The movie was great.
So I married an axe murderer. Good Scottish movie. That was Michael Myers or Mike Myers.
No, it has. Well, I don't want to overstate it, but hold on. If you read some, I gotta find it. Hold on.
Let's see. Okay, Linda corrected me. It did that movie Durango did have a horse. It pulled the supply wagon. So let's see here. Um, Greg says drugstore cowboys in Canada. Yeah, we call them urban cowboys out here. You know, they're all hat, no ride. Now, I will I am very vociferous in saying I am not any kind of a cowboy, urban or otherwise. I've been on a horse maybe 3 times in my life. Linda was the last person to get me to get on a horse. They put me on the calmest, most compliant old plug you had ever wanted to. The horse didn't want to be out there, and neither did I. But we did it. And when it was time to turn around and head for the paddock, I didn't have to do a damn thing. That horse led the way. It knew it was going home, and that was all it needed. I didn't guide it one bit. And it got us back to the stable, and we were fine. I swear there were a few times that I think the horse kind of leaned to one side and crossed its legs because we were just, waiting on the girls to get back from their little ride. It didn't want to be there, and neither did I, but I did it.
Apparently, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Apparently, there's many slasher movies in Scotland. There's I can't figure it out. I'll try to figure it out. There's
Okay.
too many actually. There's a lot of them.
Okay.
I didn't
That's fine.
expect that, but this one was a weird. It was filmed so well. It
Mhm.
felt like an exploration of a countryside. But I don't want to beat a dead horse on it. You get the
Okay.
gist of it. It doesn't sound like you're too thrilled with the
I'm
notion of
not a
the horse.
slasher movie fan. I really am not. I mean,
It's not a slasher movie, but there is a point in time in the movie. In order for the movie to get freaking like nice, in the context of the story it's unfolding, at one point it ends up, but it's not the whole movie. The most of the movie is
okay.
just an exploration. But
Um,
you'll never see it. I can tell you that much.
Probably not. Jim says lots of cows in Canada. They had to put astroturf in Winnipeg Stadium to keep the cheerleaders from grazing. Ooh, yeah. Sounds like a Texas versus Oklahoma show. Joke, rather. Let's see. Yeah, well, anyway. So yeah, we're more or less caught up with what's going on out there in the chat, except for Linda giving Jim Scottish lessons. So, but yeah, that movie Durango, I saw it in spurts, and I did find it. It is on YouTube. So just look for Durango, and it's a 1999 movie.
Okay, I'll check
So,
it out. Um, it's good to see different, and I like suspending disbelief and
mhm.
watching movies. I enjoy that.
Well, there were a lot of westerns made outside of the U.S. that were actually very good westerns. I mean, well, all of Clint Eastwood's spaghetti westerns, are prime examples of that. But even for movies that are set in the country that they were actually filmed in, when you look at movies like The Man from Snowy River, which was in Australia, or you look at Quigley Down Under, which was set in Australia. Quigley Down Under was a good flick. Tom Selleck and Adam Rickman. Uh, uh, Alan Rickman. Adam Rickman? Yeah, his lesser known brother. Um, Very good flick.
Magnum
Very
PI
flick.
and
And yeah, and Professor Snape. But it was a very, very good movie. Um,
Magnum PI. That was fun stuff
but
back in the
you
day.
had that whole Western to it because that's exactly what it was. It was a guy from the American West who came down to Australia and finds himself working a cattle ranch. And there you go. I mean, but it was a good flick.
Well, Australians do have a certain type of Aussie cowboy um, um,
Hmm.
thing to them.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. Jim, Man from Snowy River and Quigley Down Under were both Australia. There may have been one in New Zealand, but I don't remember. I don't remember off the top of my head.
You know who's from
So
New Zealand? One of
every
the
New Zealander, what?
well, every New Zealander, but the guy, his name is something Peter Jackson. Um, and he is one of the premier what do you call not producers but film people
Director?
directors. He's one of the
Hmm.
premier of our era.
Hmm.
He did the Lord of the Rings films,
Yeah, yeah,
and he has a uniquely New Zealand.
and a good portion of those films were filmed there on location in New Zealand.
Yeah, they were filmed there.
Hmm.
Beautiful, beautiful scenery. But what I was getting at is that he has his particular vantage point from his, like, you listen to him and you can detect the British leaning
Hmm.
of the tone because it is, but it's unique to their
Yeah,
thing, and
totally different accent. Yeah.
and slightly different or significantly different than Australia.
Hmm.
Um, and the sceneries over there are just beautiful. But anyways, but you said New Zealand. What a person to come out of that place with a vision for movies. Be I mean, he opened up the floodgates with the Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
He changed. I mean, it's one of my favorite trilogies of all time, but bar none. There's
It
no comparison.
it became such a thing that when they went to do the second film, they rebuilt all the Hobbiton sets and actually got in there and did them right. These are not just movie sets; they became tourist attractions, and it gets visited by millions a year who
Yeah,
just go
there's
to, just simply because of that trilogy.
just
So,
freaking awesome,
mm,
awesome stuff. But anyways, I guess to tie it all back is that each
mm,
place does have their country, and there is a sense of also cowboy.
mm,
Um, and then we have over here our South,
mm,
which is unique, although there's overlaps you could imagine in other parts of the country and the world. But the South has a unique thing because it does involve a lot of things, plus its history and so on and so forth. But
well,
my contention was that pinning it down, and I don't think it's a big thing to
mm,
leap over to, that it's not and you were said it too. We can't pin it down to one thing. It
nope,
has to be a combination of things that
right.
creates our understanding of, hey,
Now,
that's so southern.
now you wouldn't think of cowboy when you think Hawaii, but
Well,
the biggest privately owned cattle ranch, family owned cattle ranch in the United States is on the Big Island of Hawaii, the Parker Ranch. And yes, there are bigger ranches, but they're all corporate. Um, the Parker Ranch is still family owned, and when I think I've told you this, but I don't know if I've mentioned it on the podcast. When they first brought cattle, it was Mexican cowboys who were running the herds. And the Hawaiian language has 12 letters, and there is no letter S in the Hawaiian language. So when they heard Espanol, it kind of became in their language, their way of speaking, Paniolo, which is as close as they could get. and paniolo is the Hawaiian word for cowboy.
That's amazing. That
And
really is amazing.
that is, it is those cowboys of Spanish heritage with the Hawaiians that developed the ukulele, because it was a small guitar that they could play and carry with them on their backs while they were out tending to the herds and doing their things.
Who
And
first visited Hawaii from of the European nations?
the
Who was the
British,
first?
the British, Captain James Cook, um, landed on, well, he landed on Maui first. Um, there were some struggles and he was killed there. And in fact, I believe he's still buried there, but I may be wrong in that. I think he
Was
was repatriated back to the
was
British.
that 1800s or
Yeah.
1700s?
So,
18.
gosh, I'm trying to remember. Linda, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say early 1800s. And in fact, for quite a while, they were called the Cook Islands, then the Sandwich Islands,
Oh,
and
that's
then
the
the
Sandwich
Hawaiian
Islands.
Islands. Well,
That's
they
where the
were called
sandwich,
that for a little while, but let me make sure of my facts.
because I've heard that various times on occasion the Sandwich Islands.
No, the Sandwich Islands are down in South America, so I'm wrong about that. For some reason, I thought that they were called the Sandwich Islands for a while.
Huh.
Let me get in here to the.
But the Cook Islands, yes.
They were considered to be part of the Cook Islands. Now there is another area by New Zealand that are called the Cook Islands,
Oh, okay.
but many islands in the Pacific were called the Cook Islands at one time or another. Okay, there you
Be-
go.
because of him.
Um, January 18th, 1778, he landed in Oahu. Okay, he didn't land on Maui. My mistake.
Oh wow, dude,
1778. Yeah.
that's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
In in sometime in the 1800s, maybe crossing, maybe early 1800s, like 1810 or something like that, with the British going down to Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
They were whaling and such. They had a guy on board from Spain, and the ship, the whaling ship, made the rounds, ended up in New Zealand, and this man got off and never got back on and remained on the island.
His name was Alexander Selkirk.
Who?
He was a Scot. His name was Alexander Selkirk.
No, I'm talking
Okay.
about a gentleman that was Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
that was on a whaling ship, ended up in on a whaling British whaling ship, ended up in New Zealand in the early 1800s, got off and never got back on, ended up marrying various New Zealand Maori
Mm-hmm.
women, having children, and today there's
Okay, different person.
thousands of Maoris,
Mm-hmm.
and and they they even have their crest and everything because of their Spanish heritage. And he's buried on a hillside
Mm-hmm.
under a tree. Um, and that family, or the descendants of multiple generations, um, they've taken trips to Spain to see the birthplace of where this gentleman was in this town
Yeah.
in Spain and such and this and that. Um, yeah, it's an interesting. Now, what's the guy that you were talking about though?
We did a whole episode on him, Alexander Selkirk. He was a part of a mission, a British fleet that he was a quartermaster on one of the ships, and he had constant fights with the captain. And they pulled onto this little island to reprovision, get water and food and everything else. And he said, you can just let me off here. So took all of his gear and dropped him on this island, and about 5 minutes before the ship was due to sail, he says, I've changed my mind. I'm coming back aboard. And the captain pointed his pistol at him and says, no, you're not. And they took off.
They
Well,
marooned his ass, didn't
yeah,
they?
for 4 years. Well, later, okay, the pilot of that ship was William Dampier, who was a big time adventurer, pilot, navigator, you name it. And in fact, he wrote what was at the time the defining work on everything to do with islands and continents and routes and which was a safe route and where the currents flowed and where the trade winds go. Dampier's Voyages was the biggest selling book for many, many years, second only to the Bible. It was one of the world's most popular navigational volumes. And his name was William Dampier.
I'm looking at it now, but I got
He
something
was
like 1130 CE. That's way past.
William Dampier.
Well, it says here the second. Is it DAMPIEE? I'm sorry, DAMPIERRE.
Yes.
Oh, there's a. Well, I've got William the
Well,
first of Dampier.
look for William Dampier Voyages. And that'll probably link you to the book. That way you've got the right William Dampier.
Okay.
Well, he was the pilot of this book, or of this ship. And they took off and left this guy, Alexander Selkirk, on this island. 4 years later, this ship, captained by Dampier, came back to the island, rescued him, and they took off back to jolly old England, and on the way captured a Spanish galleon loaded with treasure. Dampier sailed that into harbor and was basically made a millionaire, our equivalent of a millionaire, by the rewards for the treasure he brought back. Told his story, and his story was the basis for the book Robinson Crusoe, which brought about this whole thing about being marooned on an island and what have you. And then later on, Treasure Island came about, which introduced pirates to being marooned on an island and all this other good stuff. But he was the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. And
Which is the island where the descendants today still exist, right? Oh
I
no,
don't.
that's a what's
Oh, you're thinking of Pitcairn Island with the Bounty, HMS Bounty,
okay, that's a different
with
scenario.
Fletcher Christian and the crew of the Bounty when they mutinied against that captain, and I can't remember that captain's name. Bligh, William Bligh.
Captain Bligh, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, um, we did a whole episode on Alexander Selkirk and how you can go on, you go to Google Maps and you look for Selkirk Island, and boom, it comes up. It's off the coast of South America. I want to
I've
say
seen
Chile, but I may be wrong.
I've seen some documentaries. Is that
Mm.
there's one island that's so tiny. It's owned by the British,
Mhm.
and it's somewhere in South America. Maybe it's the same one, you tell me. It's such a tiny, and British people live there
Mhm.
generationally, and they're completely disconnected from the rest of the world. Every 6 months or so on, and if you look, it's got its own little post, one road, and the post.
It
So
sounds like you're talking about Pitcairn Island.
no, but this is not a mountain, or This is in South America, not because I think the Pitcairn is more towards
Are you talking
the.
about the Falkland Islands
This
off
is
the
not the
coast of
folk.
Argentina?
It feels like it's somewhere there in that area, but it's not the Falkland Islands um, exactly. It's some sort of, and they raise sheep. Yeah, Linda says. I don't know if I saw a freaking documentary on it, and the guy has like little quaint houses, and he's talking about his life there, and they've been there generations. But I can't remember the island's name.
Well, Pitcairn Islands is in the
Pacific.
Pitcairn Island is in the South Pacific. It is off the coast of of Chile, but it's quite a ways out there. It's very remote.
This one's Atlantic, if I'm
It's
not mistaken.
it's close to French Polynesia.
Yeah,
Pitcairn Island is.
but this one that I'm talking about
Mhm.
is somewhere in the Atlantic, really likewise in the middle of nowhere, but like in the middle of no, and it's tiny, and yet British people are living there, and they've got
Um,
their own little cars and stuff. It was
are
surreal.
are you talking about South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands? That's a British um, possession. So are the Falkland Islands off the coast of
Argentina,
Argentina. Yeah.
Argentina is not too happy with that because that was a possession. They fought a war with the British, and forever and a day they've been wanting
Oh yeah.
that back.
Oh yeah.
And
Um,
now with this new guy there, they asked him the question of, well, what are we going to do about that? Well, we can always negotiate and such and this and that.
mhm.
But they're quite interested always because it's off their coast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the British. They've got their hands on something. They don't want to let go of it. So I don't know.
Well, I don't blame them. Do you?
You know, it's I don't know.
Some of the nicest people are British.
Yeah, that's true.
The history side of it is another story. In some cases,
Mhm.
in some cases not. Like it's from the vantage point of a British guy in the, or I'm sorry, a colonist in the 1700s. In many would not have necessarily cared either way whether or not, or actually would have probably preferred not to, let's say, secede from England. Let's say,
Yeah, but you're also talking about 200 plus years ago.
well,
Yeah.
yeah. But my point being is that, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Um,
The
I'm just
age of
saying,
the age of colonization is pretty much over with, is what I'm getting at. Yeah.
no, no. But my point is that well, I brought that in not to suggest that they're colonizing now. I brought that in that the history can be looked at unfavorably, but in many cases,
Oh,
people
sure.
people weren't interested in necessarily leaving or breaking from them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, so it's just now in retrospect, on a historical note.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I could have unrolled that in a different way, but the point being is that, yeah, there are connotations, but it's a historical thing.
Yeah.
It's not
It
like,
is.
you know, it's not like we're gonna blame uh, Peter for robbing Paul.
Oh, I blame Peter for everything. It's all his fault. In fact, I'm going to get a T-shirt. Blame Peter.
That's one of my. I guess I'll wrap up, my end so
Yeah.
we can land. I'll just say that's one of my doing all this,
Hmm.
which is studying different little parts that I'm interested in for my reasoning and my use
Hmm.
to learn the things that I want to learn. I can see how it's easy for someone to pick and choose and judge one group, another group, and this and that.
Sure.
And then as an extension, and this is the key point from my understanding. This is my understanding, and I'm not cutting corners with this bit. This is exactly how I feel about the matter. I could see how, in studying history, unfavorable portions or otherwise, people making from our vantage point in this current world, making judgment calls on historical situations, but then attaching historical situations. And I'm not going to get too in the weeds with this because this can go in terrible ways or good ways,
Mhm.
or somewhere in between. But I'm just as an over because it could go depending
Yeah.
on who you're talking about. Um, but I have seen the temptation where one can say, "Oh well, heck, that happened historically, and therefore all people alive today, due to a royal inheritance which doesn't exist, are culpable." And likewise, I can see how people make that, and I see it all the time on in YouTube conversation videos and such, where people um do that, and I think it's one of the biggest issues. Instead of seeing a separation between a individual and a historical events that have nothing, it has a lot to do with an individual because we all come from the people of the past,
But
but
we're not responsible for the sins of our fathers. And
exactly.
that's where the line has to be kept. And that's it. End of story. That's
Well,
it.
yeah. Well, yeah, because it doesn't logically uh, uh um
Well, but you know
continue.
how that goes. You can't use logic. You have to use emotion
Right,
with a
but
good
that's
percentage.
dangerous. But that's dangerous due to the pitchfork and torches aspect
And
of.
how far away, honestly, how far away are we from that in some areas of the country?
Oh
You
yeah,
know, that's what I
but
mean. There has
but
to be that line
it's due to
that
that
you
leap
do
of.
not cross.
Yeah, it's due to that leap of 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 judging, or of bringing historical thing. There's consequences to history. That's absolutely true. But
Absolutely.
but um it it makes no sense. I can see the temptation, right?
Well,
I'll give you
especially if you stand to gain from it. Yeah.
no, just on an ethical. I'm talking more, well, yeah. So there's people that'll use it
Hmm.
maliciously,
But
not because
we're
they've. Yeah, I'm just talking about. Let's say from my, I could see the historical goings on. I've had to question a lot of things, such as
yeah.
Cuba itself. Um, it's independent. So my father used to say, um, and this is common knowledge, but once the war was over between the Spanish and Cuba and the Americans and stuff, um, the Spanish were fighting themselves, dude. The Cubans were the Spanish, and the Spanish were the Cubans. It's just some of them were not only had roots planted in Cuba because that's, but so they were the kind of the same people. But now I've had to question myself and say after the war was over, just okay, well, grandfather fought on one side, and uncle fought on the other, and this and that. But people just went back to being. It was a weird thing. It's kind of like the Civil War here.
Hmm.
You're the it's your yes, your blood.
Hmm.
It's different, maybe context of region, but at the end, so there's all. So one has to reevaluate these things and say, damn,
Well,
but not everybody does.
you just have to accept the truth of history. You have to accept the facts of what actually happened. But you also have to accept the fact that there's nothing you can do about it. It happened, it's done, it's over. I'm not saying grow up and get over it. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we have to accept the fact that it did happen and it's behind us. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. That because at the end of the day, that's what history is there for us to learn from the successes and the failures of the people that came before us, to learn their mistakes so that we don't make them a second time, or a third, or a fourth, as the case may be. It's there for us to learn how to be better people. And it's supposed to be there to teach us how to get along a little bit better. So,
Yeah, we should use understanding to have a clear. Well, look, last thing I'll say about this.
yeah.
It also depends. I don't know about other um, cultures, but in a broad, let's call it very carefully, Western civilization culture, it does come attached with a sense of that you're saying, and I believe that's due to the religion which is part of that. That's my belief. That notion of that goodwill. I'm not excluding goodwill in other parts. I'm just saying that in the context of our broad experience, to say, there is that sense of that humility attempt and towards others and such, that goodwill, that thing. Um and losing, and that, having that present, I think it's impossible not to realize that. But a lot of people don't follow that notion and use historical things, uh, for
Well, a lot of
for
people are wrong about a lot of things. That's just my opinion.
but they do it.
Yeah. And there's nothing we can do about that either, except hope to educate them. But,
Yeah,
you know, you have to
I
want to
know.
be educated.
I know. I've learned. I know. I've learned a lot of stuff. And boy, it sure has left me like
All
jaw
right.
dropped.
We need to go ahead and land the plane. It's been almost 3 hours.
Okay. All right, folks. Well, we hope you enjoyed it. We go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time, here on the Trampled Underfoot podcast show on YouTube. And we also have a site over on Facebook, as well as a website, trampledunderfootpodcast.com. And we're sponsored by.
Harneal Media, your web solution. Look, I've been saying this for 266 episodes by now. You know what I'm going to say. Do I need to say it? Yes, evidently I do, because not all of you have reached out to Steve and talked to him about helping you set up your website, helping you set up your web store, helping you set up your merch, and helping you set up your print on demand company that will take care of all that merch. So it looks like I'm going to have to keep repeating myself until you reach out to Steve at Harneo Media. And again, when you reach out to Harneo Media, you're reaching out to Steve, not some nameless, faceless person in a call center somewhere that you're never going to talk to again. 100% of the time when you contact Harneo Media, you're talking to Steve. I consider him a friend. He's very good at what he does. He is very competitively priced. Give it a shot. Get over there. Harneal Media, HARNEAL media.com, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
All right, folks. Thank you all for hanging out. It's a new year. Is this the first one after the first? No, we've had one before. We had one
Yeah,
last week.
we did have one last week. Yes.
Okay. Um, Nothing. Enjoy this week. Have a great old time. Do the things that you love and be safe. We wish you the best, and we'll catch you here next week at the same time, same bad channel. Choose.
Peace. Get it in the camera.